The gavel fell, and Judge Robert Thompson leaned back in his chair, a smug grin spreading across his face. A mundane zoning dispute, nothing out of the ordinary. But then, Clint Eastwood, the enigmatic man before him, slowly reached into his jacket, withdrawing a small, silver object. The light glinted off its engraved surface, silencing the courtroom. The judge frowned, his breath catching in his throat. Why would a Hollywood legend carry a United States Secret Service badge? Before we delve into this story, let us know where you're watching from. Share your city or country in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Tomorrow, we'll bring you another tale filled with surprises. The story begins. The gavel slammed down, its sharp sound echoing, and the murmurs in the small Wyoming courtroom ceased. Judge Robert Thompson, a stout man with a portly frame, adjusted his spectacles, scanning the documents before him. The room, filled with a few locals and county officials, resembled a town hall meeting more than a place of law. The case at hand was a simple zoning dispute, one the judge had decided wouldn't take up much of his time. Seated at the defendant's table was Clint Eastwood, looking every bit the legend time couldn't fully tame. His weathered face bore the marks of a life well lived, and his pale blue eyes held an intensity that needed no raised voice to command. Dressed in a worn leather jacket and jeans, he appeared a man dragged into this court against his will. Judge Thompson cleared his throat. "Mr. Eastwood, the records here indicate that your guest house on the northern edge of your property exceeds the size limit set by Jackson County zoning laws. As such, the county is within its rights to demand it be brought into compliance or demolished." He glanced up, barely concealing his self-satisfied smirk. "I presume you wish to argue for its retention?" Eastwood leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. His voice, though raspy with age, carried across the room with ease. "I built that place with my own hands. It ain't bothering nobody, and I sure as hell don't like the government telling me what I can and can't do on my own land." A few chuckles rippled through the courtroom, but the judge merely shook his head. "Mr. Eastwood, the law applies to everyone, even if you have a few iconic movies to your name." More laughter erupted, but Eastwood didn't even blink. He allowed the room its moment, let them revel in the idea that they had an aging actor standing before them, pleading his case like any other citizen. Then, slowly, deliberately, he reached into his jacket. The bailiff took a half-step forward, his hand twitching near his holster, but Eastwood didn't draw a weapon. Instead, he produced a small, silver badge, placing it flat on the table where the overhead lights caught the inscription. The laughter died. Judge Thompson squinted at it, his smug grin faltering. "What the hell is this?" Eastwood leaned back, folding his arms. "That, Your Honor, is a United States Secret Service badge, and it means I've enforced more laws than zoning ordinances in my time." The judge's expression shifted instantly. His face paled, and his fingers twitched slightly. He adjusted his glasses, peering closer. He wasn't a fool. He knew what he was looking at. The badge was real, the kind issued only to those who had served in the darkest, most clandestine corners of national security. For a moment, the room was utterly silent. Then Judge Thompson cleared his throat. "Mr. Eastwood, are you telling me you're more than just an actor?" Eastwood cut him off, his voice low but firm. "And more than what's in your case file." Thompson licked his lips. The weight of what he had just learned pressed on his chest like a lead brick. There had been whispers for years, rumors that some of Hollywood's most legendary figures had pasts that shouldn't be discussed. But this was something else entirely. He glanced at the bailiff, who looked just as stunned as he felt. The spectators in the room had stopped fidgeting, their casual amusement replaced by an uneasy curiosity. Thompson shifted in his seat. "Mr. Eastwood, what exactly are you doing in Wyoming?" Eastwood offered a faint smile, but there was no warmth in it. "Just trying to live a quiet life, Your Honor." The judge studied him carefully, now understanding that the man before him was not just a Hollywood relic arguing about property lines. He was something else entirely, and suddenly, a simple zoning dispute wasn't simple at all. Judge Thompson sat rigidly in his chair, his mind struggling to reconcile what he had just seen. The weight of the courtroom had shifted, as if gravity itself had changed with the revelation of Clint Eastwood's past. The badge still lay on the table, glinting under the overhead lights. It wasn't a prop, not a relic from a movie set. It was real. More than that, it was official. He looked up at Eastwood, who sat as still as a statue. His sharp blue eyes locked on him, waiting. The judge felt a bead of sweat form at his temple. He had never been an easily flustered man, but this moment carried a different kind of weight. "Mr. Eastwood," Thompson said cautiously, clearing his throat. I wasn't aware of your affiliations." Eastwood's lips curled into a slight smirk, slow and measured. "Not many are." The judge picked up the badge, turning it over in his hand. It had a weight to it, the kind that came from real power. He had seen Secret Service badges before, but this one was different. The number, the insignia, it wasn't standard issue for a field agent or a protective detail. This was something else entirely. Finally, he set it down, exhaling. "I take it this means your role in government service isn't exactly public knowledge?" Eastwood leaned forward slightly, his expression unreadable. "You could say that." The judge studied him, feeling a strange mix of curiosity and unease. "I'll admit, I've heard rumors over the years about certain individuals, people with pasts that shouldn't be discussed. But I just thought you were an actor who happened to play tough guys on screen." Eastwood chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "You think playing tough guys is easy? You think I just read lines and pretend?" Thompson hesitated. I guess I never thought of it that way. Most people don't." Eastwood leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers on the table. "Truth is, I'm good at two things: acting and getting my hands dirty. One pays better, but the other, well, that's duty." The room was now silent, the air thick with unspoken words. Thompson shifted in his seat. What did this mean for the case? "Because I have to tell you, Mr. Eastwood, as much as I respect whatever you've done in the past, it doesn't change the fact that zoning laws exist for a reason." Eastwood nodded slowly, as if he had anticipated the response. "I'm not asking for favors. I'm asking for understanding." Thompson raised an eyebrow. "Understanding?" Eastwood's voice dropped, his raspy tone deepening. "That guest house isn't just a guest house. It's a safe house." Thompson blinked. "A safe house?" Eastwood reiterated. "Have you ever heard of Blackthorn?" The judge frowned, the name unfamiliar. "Should I have?" Eastwood's lips curled into a faint smile, but his eyes remained cold. "No, that's the whole point." Thompson tapped his fingers on his desk, his legal mind trying to piece the fragments together. "All right, let's say I believe you. Let's say your guest house serves some national security purpose. Why not go through official channels? Why argue this in a public court?" Eastwood's face darkened. "Because the people who are supposed to protect me are the ones trying to erase me." Thompson felt a chill run down his spine. "Erase you?" Eastwood nodded. "Old programs have a way of coming back to haunt those who ran them. Blackthorn was one of those programs. It was never supposed to exist, but when you work in the shadows long enough, you learn nothing stays buried. Someone wants to wipe the slate clean, and I have a feeling if I let them destroy that safe house, they'll be coming for me next." The judge swallowed hard. This was no longer a simple property dispute. It was about something much larger, something that extended far beyond Jackson, Wyoming. He glanced towards the door, half expecting men in suits to burst in at any moment. "Mr. Eastwood, you're asking me to disregard zoning laws based on something I have no proof of." Eastwood sighed, rubbing his fingers together thoughtfully. "I understand, Your Honor. You have a job to do, but you have to understand this isn't just about my property. It's about what's coming. You don't know it yet, but you're standing on the edge of something big, something dangerous." Thompson frowned. "And what exactly is coming?" Eastwood leaned forward, his voice a whisper. "A war. A war long overdue to begin." The judge stared at him, the words weighing on him like a heavy blanket. He had entered his courtroom today expecting a simple case, a routine decision about a guest house that was too large for county standards. Now he was looking into the eyes of a man who had lived more lives than anyone knew, a man warning him of a conflict not found in any history books. And for the first time in his career, Judge Thompson wasn't sure if he'd make it home intact. Judge Robert Thompson sat motionless in his chair, the weight of Clint Eastwood's words pressing down on him like a lead anchor. His courtroom was supposed to be a place of order, a sanctuary for law and logic, but now, with a man like Eastwood sitting before him, it felt like the opening scene of something much larger, something he was ill-prepared for. Outside, the Wyoming sun began to dip behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the windows. The quiet murmur of the few remaining courtroom observers had faded, replaced by an uneasy silence. The judge licked his lips, trying to regain his composure. "Mr. Eastwood, I don't appreciate threats in my courtroom." Eastwood didn't flinch, didn't even blink. "It's not a threat, Your Honor," he said, his voice calm but firm. "It's a warning." Thompson exhaled slowly, trying to ignore the tightness in his chest. "So, you expect me to believe that a simple zoning dispute is actually part of some grand conspiracy, that your property is a... what did you call it? A safe house?" Eastwood's lips curled into a faint smile. "You're catching on." The judge scoffed. "I don't have time for this. The law is the law, and your past, whatever it is, doesn't change that." Eastwood studied him carefully. "You have no idea what you're stepping into." Judge Thompson shook his head, weary of the cryptic games. "Then why don't you enlighten me? Who exactly is after you?" Eastwood breathed out through his nose, tapping his fingers lightly on the table. "There was a time when men like me weren't just assets, we were insurance policies. Blackthorn wasn't a program you joined. It was one you were selected for. And once you were in, there was no way out." Thompson narrowed his eyes. "Sounds more like a death squad than a government operation." Eastwood chuckled darkly. "You're sharper than you look." The judge folded his arms. "So, let me guess. Something changed? Something went wrong?" Eastwood nodded. "Blackthorn was officially buried, but unofficially, it went private. The men who trained us started selling their skills to the highest bidder. Nations, corporations, people with money and power, but no conscience." Thompson leaned forward, his legal instincts kicking in. "And now someone's trying to clean house, erase the tracks?" Eastwood nodded. "Exactly. And if my name's still on their list, it means I'm not the only one left alive." A knock on the side door startled Thompson slightly. The bailiff entered, leaning down to whisper something in the judge's ear. "Your Honor, there's a federal agent here, says it's urgent." Thompson stiffened. He looked at Eastwood, who remained unfazed, then back at the bailiff. "Which agency?" The bailiff whispered, "Homeland Security. He says you'll want to hear what he has to say." The judge hesitated. A federal agent showing up in the middle of a routine zoning case was anything but ordinary. Eastwood's lips curled into a faint smile. "Told you, Your Honor. You're in deeper than you think." Thompson exhaled, then nodded to the bailiff. "All right, send him in." The bailiff disappeared through the side door, which opened again moments later to admit a tall man in a dark suit. He was in his late 40s, with sharp eyes and the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to being in control. "Judge Thompson," the man said, flashing a badge. "Special Agent Mark Helton, Department of Homeland Security." Thompson regarded him cautiously. "I presume this isn't a coincidence?" Helton shook his head. "I'm afraid not." He turned his gaze to Eastwood. "Mr. Eastwood, long time no see." Eastwood gave a slight nod. "Not long enough." Helton turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, I need you to clear the courtroom." Thompson glanced around. The remaining spectators and clerks had begun to show signs of unease, sensing that something far larger was unfolding before them. He tapped his gavel once. "Court is adjourned." The room emptied within minutes, leaving only Eastwood, Thompson, and Agent Helton. Helton turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, you need to understand something. Clint Eastwood isn't just an actor. He isn't just a former agent. He's a man who was once part of something that should never have existed. And if he's flashing that badge in your courtroom, it means something very bad is happening." Thompson folded his arms, his mind reeling. "Why don't you cut the cryptic talk and tell me exactly what's going on?" Helton hesitated, then reached into his jacket, withdrawing a file. He handed it to Thompson. "This is what you're dealing with." Thompson opened the file, his eyes widening as he flipped through the grainy surveillance photos. Some were old, taken in the shadows of history, showing Eastwood alongside men whose names had long since faded into classified records. Others were more recent satellite imagery and intelligence reports. One photo showed a burned-out compound in Eastern Europe. Another depicted bodies lying in the snow, lined up like discarded pawns. The last page held a name, Logan Pierce. Thompson looked up. "Who the hell is Logan Pierce?" Helton exhaled. "The man cleaning up Blackthorn. And if he knows Eastwood is still alive, it means your courtroom just became the front line of a war you never knew existed." The judge swallowed hard. His simple zoning case had just morphed into something far more dangerous, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure he wanted to know the truth. The walls of Judge Robert Thompson's chambers seemed smaller than usual, as if the weight of the conversation was pressing down on the room enough to shrink the space. The moment Special Agent Mark Helton handed him the file, Thompson knew he was no longer just a small-town judge handling petty disputes. He was now a part of something far larger and deadlier than he had ever imagined. He flipped through the pages, his stomach tightening with each photo, each classified document. The black and white images of Clint Eastwood standing alongside high-ranking military officials, intelligence officers, and even a former president were damning enough. But it was the last few pages that made his blood run cold. "Logan Pierce," Thompson murmured, reading the name aloud. He looked up at Helton. "Who is he?" Helton leaned in, stroking his clean-shaven chin. "Pierce is a ghost, much like Eastwood. A top operative recruited into Blackthorn when it was still under unofficial government sponsorship. He was one of the best until he wasn't. Something changed. We don't know if it was greed, ideology, or something personal. But when Blackthorn was officially disbanded, Pierce didn't disappear like the others. He went private." Thompson frowned. "Private? You mean a mercenary?" Helton nodded grimly. "Worse. He's built an empire selling classified intelligence and high-profile contracts. Political assassinations, corporate warfare, covert destabilization, you name it, he's done it. And now, for reasons we don't fully understand, he's erasing Blackthorn's history, starting with the people who were once a part of it." Thompson glanced at Eastwood, who had remained silent for most of the exchange. He sat in his chair, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Finally, the judge turned back to Helton. "And you think Eastwood is on that list?" Helton gave a dry laugh. "Your Honor, Eastwood isn't just on the list. He's at the top of it." Thompson let out a sharp breath and rubbed his temples. "Good Lord." Eastwood finally spoke, his voice as steady as ever. "Why now?" Helton glanced at him. "That's what we're trying to figure out. Blackthorn was buried deep. There's no reason to dig it up unless—" He hesitated, then leaned against the table. "Unless someone's trying to reclaim it." Thompson frowned. "Reclaim it? You mean restart the program?" Helton nodded. "Think about it. Blackthorn was one of the most effective, albeit illegal, covert operations in modern history. No red tape, no oversight, just highly trained operatives eliminating threats before they become threats. If someone wanted to bring it back under private control, the first thing they'd need to do is eliminate anyone who could expose them." Thompson looked at Eastwood. "And that's why you built that safe house?" Eastwood's lips curled into a faint smile. "I always knew the past could come knocking. Just didn't expect it to come with this much firepower." The judge gave a humorless chuckle. "So what now? You expect me to just drop the zoning case and pretend none of this is happening?" Helton shook his head. "I don't care about the zoning dispute, Your Honor, but if you throw Eastwood under the bus, you're giving Pierce exactly what he wants. He's watching. He has ears in places you wouldn't believe. If this court rules against Eastwood and forces him off that property, it'll leave him vulnerable, and that's when they'll strike." Thompson sighed. He had spent his entire life believing in the law, in rules and order, but this was something else entirely. He glanced between the two men. "And what happens if I cooperate? If I let him keep his so-called safe house?" Eastwood replied, "For starters, you'll live a little longer." Thompson narrowed his eyes. "Is that supposed to be reassuring?" Eastwood gave him a slow, measured look. It's the truth. The judge leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers on the desk. I'm half-minded to recuse myself from this case entirely. Helton's face darkened. That won't help. If you step down now, someone else will take over, someone who won't have the benefit of this conversation. And if they rule against Eastwood, this whole town could become a battleground before the week's out. Thompson swallowed hard. He had never been one to shy away from difficult decisions, but this wasn't just difficult. It was terrifying. Finally, he exhaled. All right, he said, his voice smaller than before. Let's say I don't throw Eastwood to the wolves. What's to stop them from coming after me next? Helton exchanged a glance with Eastwood before answering. Nothing. Thompson felt his stomach tighten. Eastwood leaned forward. The difference is now you know they're coming. That means you can prepare. Thompson breathed out slowly, shakily. And if I say no? Eastwood didn't answer. Helton spoke. Then you'll be the next name on the list, Your Honor, and no one will know why. Silence fell over the chambers. Thompson glanced down at the file, at the images of dead men, of places that no longer existed, of an organization that had been erased from history. For the first time in his life, he realized the law wouldn't protect him, and for the first time in his life, he was afraid. The sun was nearly set when Judge Robert Thompson pulled into his driveway. The long, winding road leading to his modest Wyoming home was usually a source of comfort, a refuge from the stress of the courtroom and paperwork, but tonight it felt stark, vulnerable. As he turned off the engine and stepped out, the crisp mountain air did little to soothe his anxiety. The day's events replayed in his mind like a nightmare. Clint Eastwood wasn't just an aging Hollywood legend arguing a petty zoning dispute. He was a man with a past so dark and secretive that the federal government had long since buried it, and now someone was exhuming it piece by piece, starting with the people who had lived through it, and he had somehow stumbled right into the middle of it. A voice cut through the silence. Thompson jumped, his heart pounding in his chest. He turned to see Eastwood leaning against his porch, arms crossed, the brim of his worn hat casting a shadow over his eyes. The old man looked as if he had been standing there for hours, waiting. Damn it, Eastwood, Thompson muttered, clutching his chest. You trying to give me a heart attack? Eastwood's lips curled into a faint smile. If that scared you, Your Honor, you're not ready for what's coming. Thompson exhaled slowly, rubbing his temples. Ought to have you arrested for trespassing. You can try, Eastwood said, pushing off the porch and walking closer, but right now, I'm the only thing standing between you and the people who want to see you 6 feet under. The judge regarded him cautiously. Is that supposed to make me feel better? Eastwood's smile faded. No, it's supposed to make you listen. Thompson sighed and gestured toward the house. All right, come on in. But if you're going to drop any more bombshells on me, at least let me have a drink first. Inside, Thompson poured himself a stiff glass of whiskey and gestured toward Eastwood, who shook his head. Never drink when I'm expecting trouble, Eastwood said, settling into a chair. Habit from your other career? Thompson asked, taking a long sip. Eastwood nodded. Let's just say it's kept me alive longer than most. Thompson exhaled and leaned against the counter. All right, Clint, start talking. You've made it clear this whole thing is bigger than a zoning dispute, and after what Helton showed me today, I'm inclined to believe you, but what I don't understand is why now? Why Wyoming? Why me? Eastwood tapped his fingers on the armrest of the chair, thinking. Blackthorn was buried for a reason, too dangerous, too unpredictable. The kind of program that makes enemies. Someone wants it back, and they're willing to kill to make sure the people who ran it, people like me, aren't around to stop them. Thompson set his glass down. Okay, but what does that have to do with me? Eastwood's eyes flickered, sharp as ever. Because you made a mistake, Your Honor. You laughed at the wrong man in the wrong courtroom. That told them you didn't know who I was. And that made you the perfect pawn. Thompson frowned. Pawn for what? Eastwood leaned forward, his voice lower. Pierce is testing me. He wants to see how I react. See if I'll fight back or lie down and die. He's watching, listening, and if I simply accept your ruling, he'll know I'm weak. Thompson gave a dry laugh. And instead, I'm now caught in a secret war I didn't even know existed. Something like that, Eastwood said. The judge rubbed his face. Good God. What the hell am I supposed to do now? Eastwood stood up, adjusting his jacket. For starters, lock your doors, Your Honor. Board up your windows, and if you see something off, trust your gut and don't hesitate. Thompson swallowed hard. Is it that bad? Eastwood stared at him. Worse. A tense silence filled the room. Thompson felt its weight pressing down on his chest. Then, from outside, a sudden click. Eastwood moved before Thompson could even register what was happening. In one fluid motion, he grabbed the judge and pulled him to the ground, just as the front window exploded. Shattered glass rained down as a bullet embedded itself in the wall behind them. Thompson's ears rang from the sudden impact, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. What the hell was that? Eastwood was already moving. He rolled to the side, drawing a pistol from inside his jacket. He peered through the shattered window, scanning the darkened landscape outside. Another shot rang out, hitting the floor just inches from Thompson's outstretched hand. He recoiled, his heart pounding. Stay down, Eastwood growled. The judge barely had time to comply before Eastwood returned fire. 3 precise, controlled shots. A moment of silence, then the distant sound of a car engine roaring to life. Tires screeched on the pavement as the shooter sped away into the night. Eastwood remained still, gun raised, waiting, listening. Nothing. Slowly, he exhaled and lowered his weapon. He turned to Thompson, who was still on the floor, eyes wide and breathing heavily. Welcome to Blackthorn, Your Honor, Eastwood said, tucking his gun back into his jacket. Thompson looked around the ravaged living room, his mind reeling. Just hours ago, he was a simple judge handling a simple case. Now he was dodging bullets from unseen enemies. He ran a hand through his hair, swallowing hard. Good God. Clint. What the hell have I gotten myself into? Eastwood's lips curled into a faint smile, but there was no humor in it. The fight of your life, Your Honor. Thompson stared at the shattered window, at the bullet holes in his wall, at the spent casings littering his hardwood floor. For the first time in his life, he felt truly helpless, and for the first time in his life, he understood exactly what fear felt like. Judge Robert Thompson remained unmoving from his spot on the floor, his ears still ringing from the gunshots, his breathing uneven. The bullet holes in his living room wall were real, the shattered window, the cold wind blowing in from outside. All of it was real, and that meant everything Clint Eastwood had told him was real too. Eastwood stood firm, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp as ever. He scanned the darkened landscape outside the broken window, watching, waiting. The gun was still in his hand, the barrel steady. He had not flinched once when the bullets were flying. Thompson swallowed hard. Clint, tell me you know who that was. Eastwood didn't take his eyes off the outside. If I had to guess, someone working for Pierce. Could be local muscle, could be professionals. He turned back to Thompson. Whoever it was, it means we're out of time. Thompson rubbed his face, his hands trembling slightly. Good God, you're right. They really are after you, and now they know I'm involved. Eastwood added, you're officially a loose end, Your Honor. That means they'll be back. The words settled in Thompson's stomach like a stone. He had always lived his life by the law, believing in the power of rules and order. But this wasn't about law, it wasn't even about justice. It was about survival. He struggled to his feet, his knees feeling weak. All right, so what the hell do we do now? Eastwood holstered his weapon and walked to the shattered window, peering out into the darkness. We move now. Thompson frowned. Move? Move where? Somewhere they won't expect, Eastwood said, already moving toward the door. Somewhere safe. Thompson gave a dry laugh. Safe? I'm guessing that doesn't exist anymore. Eastwood glanced back at him. Oh, it exists, but getting there won't be easy. The judge hesitated. He wasn't used to this. He was used to being in control, to wielding the power to dictate outcomes from his judge's seat. But now he was just a man on the run for his life. He let out a sharp breath. All right, let's go. Eastwood nodded, stepping outside first, scanning the street. The night was still, too still, the smell of gunpowder still lingering in the air. Thompson followed him, locking the door behind him. though he knew it wouldn't stop anyone determined to get inside. "Where are we going?" Eastwood didn't answer immediately. He walked to an old pickup truck parked at the edge of the driveway and opened the glove compartment. Inside, Thompson caught a glimpse of a few items: a spare pistol, extra ammunition, and something that looked suspiciously like an encrypted phone. Finally, Eastwood turned to him. "Utah, Salt Lake City." Thompson blinked. "Utah? What the hell's in Utah?" Eastwood handed him a slip of paper. "A man named Joseph Joe. If he's still alive, he'll have answers." The name was unfamiliar, but then, everything about this situation was outside Thompson's expertise. He glanced at Eastwood. "And if he's not alive?" Eastwood's lips curled into a faint smile. "Then we're too late." The drive was long, silent, and tense. Eastwood drove with a focus that suggested he had done this many times before. His hands were steady on the wheel, his eyes constantly scanning the road, the rearview mirror, the headlights of other cars passing by. Thompson, on the other hand, was trying to keep his composure. The whiskey he had drunk earlier had long since evaporated, leaving only a throbbing headache of reality. Finally, after nearly an hour of silence, Thompson spoke up. "Tell me about this Joe guy." Eastwood didn't take his eyes off the road. Joseph Joe was one of the best at surveillance, infiltration, cleanup. He's the guy they sent in when they wanted something or someone to disappear without a trace. Thompson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "And you trust him?" Eastwood gave a dry laugh. "I don't trust anyone, Your Honor, but I know if Joe's still breathing, he's probably already got eyes on us." Thompson frowned. "What do you mean?" Eastwood tapped the dashboard. "Blackthorn operatives don't get caught off guard. If he's still alive, he knows we're coming." That didn't make Thompson feel any better. "Then why go see him?" "Because," Eastwood said, his voice flat, "he's the only one left who might know what Pierce is planning." Thompson sighed, rubbing his temples. "I can't believe I'm mixed up in this. I'm a judge, Clint, not a soldier." Eastwood glanced at him. "You're still breathing, aren't you?" Thompson narrowed his eyes. "What's that supposed to mean?" Eastwood's lips curled into a faint smile. "It means you're in the fight whether you like it or not." The judge let out a sharp breath, shaking his head. "This is insane. Yesterday I was worried about property lines. Now I'm on the run with a former government assassin." Eastwood's smile faded. "You think this is just about me, about Blackthorn, Your Honor? You have no idea how deep this goes. Pierce isn't just cleaning up the past. He's preparing for something else, something bigger." Thompson frowned. "Like what?" Eastwood gripped the steering wheel tighter. "That's what we're about to find out." Miles behind them, a black SUV sped down the same highway, keeping its distance. Inside, a man in a dark suit watched the taillights of Eastwood's truck through the tinted windows. He raised a phone to his ear, pressing a single button. "They're moving," he said, his voice calm, professional. The response came almost immediately, a cold voice on the other end of the line. "Do we take them now?" A pause. "No," the man said. "Let them run. It'll be easier that way." He hung up, looking out at the open road ahead. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The highway stretched before them, an endless ribbon of asphalt cutting through the Utah desert. The air outside was thick with the kind of stillness that only existed in the late hours, when the world seemed to pause, waiting for something to happen. Inside Clint Eastwood's truck, Judge Robert Thompson was beginning to understand a terrifying truth. There was no turning back. His life had changed in a single courtroom session. He had gone from ruling on zoning disputes to dodging bullets in his own home, from believing in the power of the law to realizing that there were men who lived far beyond its reach. Clint Eastwood was one of those men, and now, by some twist of fate, so was he. The Wyoming mountains had long since faded behind them, and Salt Lake City loomed ahead, a cluster of glittering lights at the foot of the Wasatch Range. But despite the promise of civilization, Thompson had never felt so exposed. He glanced at Eastwood, who had said little since they left his house. The old man drove with a steady, practiced precision, his eyes flicking between the road ahead, the rearview mirror, and the horizon, scanning for threats. Thompson sighed. "Tell me something, Clint." How the hell did you get into this life? Eastwood's lips curled into a faint smile, but he didn't take his eyes off the road. You really want to know? Not particularly, but since I clearly don't have a choice anymore, I might as well find out what kind of mess I'm in. Eastwood was silent for a long moment before speaking. I was recruited young. Special projects, the kind of work that never makes it into the history books. Blackthorn had no ranks, no titles. We were just men who got the job done. Nobody knew our names, and that's how it was supposed to be. Thompson swallowed hard. But people know your name. Eastwood chuckled. Yes, that's what made me useful. Who would suspect a Hollywood actor of running covert operations? The judge shook his head. So all these years you were a ghost? A ghost, Eastwood repeated. But ghosts don't stay buried forever. There's always someone who wants to dig them up. Thompson sighed, staring at the road ahead. And now Pierce is doing the digging. Looks that way, Eastwood said. Thompson rubbed his temples. And this Joe guy, he's gonna help us? Eastwood's lips curled into a faint smile. Joe doesn't help people. He survives, and right now, if he's still alive, he knows we're coming. That means one of two things. Either he's ready to talk, or he's packed up and disappeared. Thompson frowned. And if it's the second option? Eastwood gripped the steering wheel tighter. Then we're out of time. They reached Salt Lake City just before dawn, driving into a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of town. The houses here were modest, old but well-maintained, the kind of place where people still left their porch lights on at night and trusted their neighbors. Eastwood slowed the truck as they approached a single-story house at the end of a cul-de-sac. The curtains were drawn, the porch light off. Thompson frowned. You sure this is the place? Eastwood nodded. Joe always liked to keep things low profile. They sat in the truck for a moment, both men silently studying the house. Finally, Eastwood unbuckled his seatbelt. Stay here, Thompson scoffed. Hell no, I'm not sitting here while you go knock on the door of a trained killer. Eastwood glanced at him. Suit yourself. They stepped out of the truck, cautiously approaching the walkway. Eastwood knocked twice, firmly but not aggressively. No answer. He knocked again, still nothing. Thompson shifted uncomfortably. Maybe he's not home. Eastwood shook his head. He's home. Thompson frowned. How do you? A click sounded from behind them. Hands where I can see them. Thompson's breath caught in his throat. The voice was low, controlled, unmistakably dangerous. Eastwood, to his credit, didn't even flinch. Hello, Joe. They turned slowly. Standing in the driveway was a man in his late 60s, lean but wiry, with sharp blue eyes that never stopped moving. He held a shotgun at his hip, relaxed but ready. Clint, Joe said, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had seen too much. You've got a lot of nerve showing up here. Eastwood's lips curled into a faint smile. That's what they keep telling me. Joe's eyes flicked to Thompson. And who's this? Judge Robert Thompson, Eastwood said. He got pulled into this by accident. Joe gave a dry laugh. Bad luck, Your Honor. Real bad luck. Thompson sighed. Yeah, I'm starting to get that. Joe studied them both for a moment, then sighed. All right, get inside. But if this is a trap, I'll bury both of you. Eastwood's lips curled into a faint smile. Try me. Inside, Joe's house was exactly what Thompson expected. Mostly empty, no family photos, no personal effects, just a bare couch, a table, and a few chairs. The walls were bare, the windows double-paned. This wasn't a home, it was a hideout. Joe set the shotgun on the table and poured himself a drink. So, Clint, you want to tell me why the hell you're here? Eastwood sat down, resting his elbows on his knees. Blackthorn's back. Joe's face twitched slightly, but he didn't react otherwise. He took a slow sip of his drink before responding. That's not funny, Clint. Not a joke, Eastwood said. Someone's cleaning up loose ends. I'm still breathing, which means they're still hunting. Joe exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. Damn it. I should have seen this coming. I noticed some irregular activity a few weeks back. Encrypted messages jumping between old channels. Thought it was just noise, but now... He turned to Eastwood. You sure they're hunting us? Eastwood nodded. They took a few shots at the judge last night. Joe whistled. That's one hell of an introduction to the game. Thompson folded his arms. I don't consider getting shot at part of any game. Joe's lips curled into a faint smile. Then you better learn fast, Your Honor. 'Cause you're in it now. Silence fell over the room. Finally, Eastwood spoke up. Pierce is pulling the strings, isn't he? Joe didn't answer immediately. He took another sip of his drink, then set the glass down. Yeah, and if he knows we're talking right now, we don't have much time. A sudden sound outside, the crunch of gravel under tires. Joe's expression darkened. Damn it, too late. Eastwood moved first, grabbing his gun. They found us. Thompson felt his stomach tighten. Good God, what do we do? Joe chambered around in his shotgun. We fight. Outside, black SUVs rolled to a stop, doors opening, tactical-clad men stepping out, weapons at the ready. The hunt had just become a fight. The silence before the storm stretched, carrying a tension that was thick and suffocating. Outside, the SUVs had come to a full stop, their tinted windows reflecting the dim light from the street lamps. The engines purred softly, idling like predators waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Inside the house, Clint Eastwood moved like a man who had done this too many times to count. The gun was already in his hand, held low but ready. He glanced at Joe, who had positioned himself near the front window, shotgun pressed to his shoulder. Judge Robert Thompson, on the other hand, was frozen, his heart pounding in his chest, his breath short and uneven. He had spent years in the courtroom, passing judgment, making decisions that affected people's lives. But this was something else entirely. He was no longer just presiding over fates. He was in them. Joe spoke first, his voice low and sharp. They're not moving yet, probably waiting for us to make the first mistake. Eastwood nodded. People working for Pierce don't rush. They calculate, they study, then they strike. Thompson swallowed hard. So what the hell do we do? Eastwood glanced at him, his voice calm. We make sure they regret showing up. Joe gave a dry laugh. Still got that cowboy attitude. Huh? Eastwood's lips curled into a faint smile, but he didn't reply. He turned back to the window, watching the men outside. They were moving, slowly, methodically, black tactical gear, suppressed weapons, no identifying marks. Joe muttered, "Professionals." Eastwood exhaled through his nose. "Yeah, but that doesn't mean they're better than us." Joe tightened his grip on the shotgun. "Hope you're right, Clint, 'cause we're about to find out." A sudden thud against the front door startled Thompson. It wasn't a knock. It was a test, checking to see if the door was reinforced. Then, from outside, a low voice. "Eastwood, we know you're in there. Don't make this messy." Thompson felt a chill run down his spine. The voice was calm, too calm. Eastwood didn't flinch. "They always say that before things get messy," he murmured. Joe's lips curled into a faint smile. "Guess we should oblige them, then?" Before Thompson could react, Joe raised his shotgun and fired through the front window. The blast was deafening in the small house. Shattered glass sprayed outwards, and a sharp, pained cry echoed from outside. The first shot hit its mark, and then all hell broke loose. Gunfire erupted, suppressed rounds punching through the walls, tearing through furniture, dust and debris flying everywhere. The quiet suburban home was now a war zone. Eastwood moved fast, low, and returning fire with precise, controlled shots. One round found its mark, one of the men outside falling with a choked gasp. Thompson hit the floor, covering his head. "Good God!" Joe reloaded, grinning. "Welcome to the real world, Your Honor." Another volley of shots ripped through the house, and Eastwood grabbed Thompson by the collar, pulling him back. "We can't stay pinned down here. Time to move." Thompson stumbled after him, adrenaline surging through his body. "Where do we go?" Eastwood said simply. "Outside." Joe nodded, firing another shot before following. "Yeah, before they send something heavier." As if in response, a loud metallic clang echoed from outside. Joe swore. "RPG." Eastwood moved faster than any man his age had a right to. He grabbed the judge and shoved him towards the back hallway, just as an explosion tore through the front of the house. The shockwaves sent debris flying, overturned furniture, and blew out the remaining windows. Thompson hit the ground hard, his ears ringing. For a moment, it was all noise and chaos. Then Eastwood's voice cut through. "Get up, Judge, we're not dead yet." Thompson struggled to his feet, his legs shaky. "Good God, they're serious." Joe dusted himself off, coughing. "Yeah, no kidding." Eastwood reloaded his weapon. "Time to go. We're going out the back." Thompson hesitated. "And then where?" Eastwood looked at him. "Anywhere but here." They burst through the back door, moving fast. The alley behind the house was temporarily clear, but that wouldn't last. Eastwood led the way, cutting through narrow passages, his instincts guiding him. Joe followed close behind, shotgun still raised. Thompson stumbled after them, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Do you two do this often?" Joe chuckled. "More than we'd like." A sudden shout from behind them. "They're running." More gunfire erupted, rounds whizzing past them, ricocheting off brick and metal. Eastwood spun around, firing 2 quick shots. One of the pursuers went down, the other dove for cover. "Keep moving." They cut through another alley, then another. The city streets were still deserted, too early for most people to be out, too late for anyone to notice what was happening in the shadows. Finally, Eastwood spotted what he was looking for. An old sedan parked near a side street. He yanked on the door handle, locked. Joe stepped forward, pulling a lockpick from his belt and popping the lock in seconds. "Old habits die hard," he muttered. Eastwood slid into the driver's seat. "Get in." Thompson hesitated. "You steal cars too?" Joe grinned. "Your Honor, I think you're starting to get the picture." Thompson muttered something under his breath, but climbed in anyway. At this point, arguing seemed pointless. Eastwood started the car, just as more figures appeared at the end of the alley. "Hold on." He slammed on the gas, the sedan lurching forward, tires squealing as they sped away. Gunfire erupted behind them, but the car was already disappearing into the early morning haze. They didn't stop until they reached the outskirts of the city, turning onto a deserted dirt road. Eastwood finally slowed the car, exhaling. Joe leaned back in his seat. "Well, that was fun." Thompson glared at him. "Fun? I almost got my damn head blown off." Joe grinned. "Welcome to the club, Your Honor." Eastwood turned back to them. "Joe, we need answers now." Joe nodded, rubbing his temples. Yeah, I get it. Look, if Pierce is making a move, we need to figure out what he's after, and I have a feeling I know where to start." Thompson frowned. "Where?" Joe took a deep breath. "There's one person who might know what Pierce is planning." Eastwood's eyes narrowed. "Who?" Joe hesitated, then spoke a name that sent a chill through the air. "Victor Richard." Thompson looked between them. "Who the hell is Victor Richard?" Joe's face darkened. "He was our handler when Blackthorn was still running covertly." Eastwood's expression hardened. "And if he's still alive, he's the only one who can tell us what Pierce really wants." The judge let out a sharp breath. "Great, another ghost from the past." Joe's lips curled into a faint smile. "You're catching on, Your Honor." Eastwood started the car again. "Then let's go. Find him." The hunt wasn't over. It was just beginning. The dirt road stretched ahead, swallowed by the early morning mist. The stolen sedan rattled over the rough terrain, the old engine groaning with each bump. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension, the silence between the 3 men heavy with unspoken thoughts. Clint Eastwood sat behind the wheel, hands gripping firmly, eyes fixed on the road ahead. Judge Robert Thompson sat in the passenger seat, still trying to process the events of the night, while Joseph Joe sat in the back, shotgun resting on his knees. Thompson finally broke the silence. "Victor Richard, you said he was your handler, so that means he was your boss?" Joe gave a dry laugh. "Boss? No, Richard wasn't the type to give orders. He was the type to make sure the job got done. No questions asked, no loose ends." Thompson frowned. "And now he's supposed to have the answers we need?" Eastwood spoke up for the first time in a while, his voice low but firm. "If Richard's still alive, he knows more than anyone. He's the only one who saw every side of Blackthorn. The missions, the people, the aftermath. If Pierce is trying to rebuild it, Richard's the key. Thompson sighed, rubbing his temples. So, where do we find him? Joe pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his jacket and tossed it into Thompson's lap. That's his last known location, deep in the Arizona desert, outside a town nobody's ever heard of. Thompson unfolded the paper, reading the name of the place. Red Mesa, Arizona. The judge gave a dry laugh. You mean we're driving into the middle of the desert to find a ghost? Eastwood's lips curled into a faint smile. It wouldn't be the first time. It took them nearly a full day to reach the Arizona border. The highways were long and empty, the kind that seemed to stretch on forever. Red Mesa wasn't on most maps, and the deeper they drove into the desert, the more isolated the world around them became. By the time they reached the town, the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the dusty streets. Red Mesa was nothing special. A cluster of old buildings, a lone gas station, a diner, and not much else. The kind of place where people kept to themselves and strangers weren't welcome. Joe leaned forward, peering out the window. Richard always liked places like this, places where the past didn't exist. Eastwood pulled into the gas station parking lot, shutting off the engine. We start asking around. Someone here knows where he is. Thompson frowned. And if he doesn't want to be found? Eastwood's lips curled into a faint smile. Then we make him want to be found. The gas station was run by an old man who looked as if he had been there since the place was built. He eyed them suspiciously as they walked in, a half-smoked cigarette dangling from the corner of his mouth. Eastwood approached the counter. We're looking for someone, Victor Richard. The old man exhaled a plume of smoke, barely reacting. Never heard of him. Joe chuckled. That's funny, 'cause we were told he'd been living around here for a while now. The old man's eyes flicked between them. Don't know what you boys are talking about. Thompson, standing behind them, could see the lie plainly. The man knew something, he was hiding it. Eastwood sighed. Look, friend, we're not here to cause trouble. We just need to talk to him. The old man studied them for a long moment, then finally muttered, Try the diner. You didn't hear it from me. Eastwood nodded. Much obliged. As they stepped back outside, Thompson shook his head. You really think he'd be sitting in the diner? Joe's lips curled into a faint smile. If I knew someone was looking for me, I'd be watching my back from the safest place in town. And that's usually where the coffee's hot and the exits are clear. The Red Mesa Diner was a relic from another era. The faded neon sign buzzing. The leather booths cracked. The smell of burnt coffee hanging in the air. The place was nearly empty, save for a waitress wiping down the counter and a lone man sitting in the back corner. Thompson knew even before Eastwood and Joe started walking towards him that they had found Richard. The man was older than they remembered, his once dark hair now white, his face etched with wrinkles. He wore a simple flannel shirt and jeans, blending in with the locals, but his eyes, his sharp, calculating eyes, hadn't changed. He wasn't surprised to see them. He just sighed and took a sip of his coffee. I wondered when you boys would show up. Eastwood slid into the booth opposite him, Joe sitting next to him. Thompson hesitated a moment before sitting beside Eastwood. Richard set his mug down and sighed. You always were too stubborn to die, Clint Eastwood. Eastwood's lips curled into a faint smile. I could say the same about you. Richard chuckled, shaking his head. Guess we're all ghosts now. Joe leaned forward. We need answers, Richard. Pierce is making a move, he's hunting us. Richard's expression darkened. He glanced at the waitress, then back at them. Not here, Eastwood asked. Then where? Richard stood up, tossing a few bills on the table. Follow me. Richard led them out the back of the diner, down a dirt road that led to a small trailer on the edge of town. He unlocked the door and stepped inside, gesturing for them to follow. The interior was small but clean, filled with old maps, files, and a single rifle leaning against the wall. Richard sank heavily into a chair, rubbing his temples. So, you say you want to know what Pierce is up to? Eastwood nodded. We need to know how far he's willing to go. Richard sighed. Pierce isn't just cleaning up Blackthorn's past. He's rebuilding it. Thompson frowned. I thought Blackthorne was buried. Clint Eastwood isn't just an actor, but a man with a mysterious past. This story makes us wonder, if you were Judge Willis, what would you do when you discover this shocking truth? Would you follow the law or protect the man being hunted? Please share your thoughts in the comments. Your opinion could bring a fresh perspective and inspire many people. If you find this story compelling, don't forget to share it with your friends and family to explore the thrilling truths behind famous faces together. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to not miss the next dramatic stories. Have a great day. Thank you for supporting the channel. Please like, share, and subscribe to receive the latest updates. These stories are collected from various sources and do not represent any individual or organization. They are shared for the purpose of spreading humane values in life and have been rewritten with the assistance of AI. If there are any errors, please excuse them with understanding. Wish you all the best in life.